Welcome to the African News Review podcast, where we cut through the noise and get to the truth. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and each week we are here to challenge the biases, prejudices, and misinformation in the Western press about Africa. Using historical context and contemporary insights, we set the record straight and reclaim the narrative. Tune in every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we uncover the real stories and reshape the conversations about Africa. This is the African News Review podcast, reclaiming Africa's narrative, one story at a time. Yes, greetings, and welcome to African News Review, our weekly conversation in which we look at Africa's coverage in the Western media and deconstruct the stories together. I'm your host, as usual, Adesoji Iginla, and with me is a journalist, publisher, Blackstar News, broadcaster, Blackstar News Show every Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern on WBAI.5 FM, New York Radio. He's also the author of a world-acclaimed book, Manufacturing Hate, which inspired this program, is Comrade Milton Allimadi.
Yes, thank you, as always, Comrade. And I actually have an update. I have a verbal commitment from the publisher to return my copyrights. So, knock on wood, I'm waiting for it in the mail. And once I get in the mail, I will announce it again. So, this time we can try to find a publisher who actually is not afraid of selling the book.
We might actually get an updated version of this as well, because it's still very relevant, but I think it needs more bulking up in light of
I'll definitely
what
update.
We've done here. Yeah. Yes. And
before you actually start our conversation, I just want to congratulate President Joe Biden. I think it's unforgivable what he and his administration allowed to unfold in Gaza. And never be forgiven for the genocide of the Palestinian people. But nonetheless, as he leaves office, I want to congratulate him on issuing a posthumous presidential pardon to Marcus Garvey.
Yes.
So we have to acknowledge it. Garvey was the premier Pan-African in history.
Yeah. And long overdue as well. Yes. Man, it's a good week so far. And long may that continue. And so for our first story today, we go to Congo and we take up the story from the BBC, and it's titled The Remarkable Life of Andrea Blouin, Africa's Overlooked Independence Heroine. The story is filed in by Wadeli Chibulichi. And it reads, I know you can die twice. First comes the physical death, to be forgotten. To be forgotten is a second death, notes screenwriter Eve Blouin, who happens to be the daughter of this lady in the picture, in an epilogue at the end of her mother's autobiography. Eve understood this sentiment more than most. In the 1950s and 1960s, her mother, the late Andrea Blouin, threw herself into the light for a free Africa, mobilizing the Democratic Republic of Congo, women against colonialism, and rising to become a key advisor to Patrice Lumumba, the DRC first prime minister and a revered independence hero. She traded ideas with famed revolutionaries like Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah, Guinea's Sekou Touré, and Algeria's Ahmed Ben Bella. Yet her story is hardly known. Going some way towards remedying this injustice, Blouin's journey featured in last year's Oscar shortlisted documentary, Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat. What is more, Blouin's memoir titled My Country, Africa, Autobiography of the Black Passonieri, it's been re-released, having spent decades out of print. Your initial thoughts on the story?
Well, I'm very elated that it's getting major space like this, because obviously there are many African sisters who contributed to the struggle for liberation, and then in the post-independence years as well, who are not well known and don't get the recognition that they deserve. because much of the news has been dominated by the male figures who were prominent in the liberation struggle. I first heard about her and knew about her only as recent as, I believe, maybe 3 years ago, when I read Susan Williams' White Malice,
Yes.
the CIA and the covert recolonization of Africa. That's the first time I heard of her. I never heard of her,
Yes.
So it tells you there are many, many stories, major stories that we need to know about that we still don't know. So I'm very elated that it's getting this prominent coverage.
Okay. I'll delve a little deeper. So the book is coming back into print. I have a copy somewhere, but I can't readily get to it right now. Blouin was born in 1921 to a 40-year-old white father and a 14-year-old black mother.
Yeah, see, that's the part I completely detest. It shows you how many European men were going around raping these African girls all over the continent. That itself should be the subject of a dissertation. I'm sure there's a very good book there. And fortunately, in this case, in spite of the rape, the person who was born as an outcome contributed very significantly to the history of Africa. And obviously it was because of her determination and perseverance that, she rose above the stigma of her origin. So it shows you how remarkable of a woman this person must have been.
Yes. Okay. I'll continue. When she was just 3, Blouin's father placed her in a convent for mixed-race girls, which was run by French nuns in the neighboring Congo, Brazzaville. This was a common practice in France and Belgium African colonies. It is thought that thousands of children were born to colonialists, and African women were sent to orphanages and separated from the rest of society. Blouin wrote, the orphanage served as a kind of waste bin for the waste products of this black and white society, the children of mixed blood who fit nowhere.
Yeah.
I think we see it. Go on.
This, of course, reminds of the recent episode we had when we discussed the Belgian case, where the Belgian state was ordered by a court to compensate to ladies who are in their 70s now, whose fathers were Belgian men in what is now Democratic Republic of Congo, who similarly abandoned them to these church institutions. And obviously, it poses the question, what is France doing about its own responsibility and obligation? And hopefully, the same lawyers who pursued the case in Belgium will now turn their attention to potential cases in France as well.
Yes. So, let's continue. And there she is. Second bottom. There she is. At the time, Guinea was in the midst of a political tempest. She wrote, France had promised the country independence, but also required Guinea to vote in a referendum on whether or not the country should maintain economic, diplomatic, and military ties with France. The Guinea branch of the Pan-African movement, the Rassemblement Démocratique Africain, RDA, wanted the country to vote no, arguing that the country needed total liberation. In 1958, Blouin joined the campaign, driving throughout the country to speak at rallies. A year later, Guinea secured its independence by voting no, and Sékou Touré, Guinea's RDA leader, became the nation's. Do you want to tell our audience what became of said vote?
Yes, of course. That was when France was still trying to be creative in finding ways to maintain colonialism after official colonialism had ended. and made the proposition that it was a so-called referendum, where, of course, they had no choice. But the alleged choice was to maintain economic defense of relationship with France or to go totally independent. And, of course, Guinea, under Sékou Touré, was the only one to vote for total independence. And to show you that it was not really an option as a choice, the French state punished Guinea for that by essentially imposing an economic embargo against Guinea, removing all the expatriate workers who were working there, removing physical items from buildings.
Infrastructure, destroying the infrastructure.
Ripping off physical material and repatriating it back to France. In fact, the Guinean state would have collapsed very quickly had it not been for Ghana, which loaned Guinea $10 million at the time. And that amount in today's money would be probably more than $100 million. $100 million, which is significant for an African state to lend to another African state.
So at this point, Blouin had begun to develop considerable clout in post-colonial and Pan-African circles. She wrote that after Guinea became independent, she used this influence to advise CAR's new president, Barthélemy Boganda, persuading him to stand down in a diplomatic row with Congo-Brazzaville's post-independence leader, Faubert Yolu. Blouin was pulled in two directions. On one hand, she had three young children, including Eve to raise. On the other hand, she had the restlessness of an idealist with a certain anger at the world as it was. Eve, the daughter, is telling BBC. So what do you think of that tussle between home life and the ideal?
Well, essentially, that is what really confines and limits the contribution that women have been able to make toward the liberation struggle. Although I advise people to really go back and study the War of Liberation in Zimbabwe, when they were fighting against the white racist regime of Ian Smith when it was still called Rhodesia. There are many accounts of women who were part of the Patriotic Front, the guerrilla movement alliance between Robert Mugabe and Joshua Nkomo. Some of the women fighters would deliver their children, and within a few days, they're back on the front line. That was a very common story. But at the same time, it does tell us that raising our children should be a partnership so that both men and women can also participate in liberation struggle or in the development struggle in African countries today.
Just taking a quick break here on the African News Review podcast, but don't go anywhere. If you're enjoying our deep dive into the real stories behind the headlines, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern, we're here to debunk the myths and bring you the truth about Africa. Want to help spread the word? Share this podcast with your friends and leave us a review. It goes a long way in helping others discover the real Africa. Without further ado, let's get back to setting the record straight. Yes, one final part. There she is in the corner. That was her husband, and that's the daughter. That's the great secretary right there. He addressed crowds of women, encouraging them to push for gender equality as well as Congo independence. I mean, we're talking gender equality in the 1960s.
Yeah, she was ahead of her.
She also had a knack for organizing and strategy. Soon, the colonial powers and international press caught wind of Blouin's work, and they accused her of being, amongst many things, Nkrumah's mistress, Secretary's agent, and the courtesans of all African chiefs.
Right, and
state.
Obviously, if it was not a woman, that would not have been the suggestion. In other words, a woman cannot be totally disinterested in contributing her capabilities and knowledge and skills to the liberation struggle. She's advising men, so there has to be some romantic relationship. That is the presumption of media,
And
even if there was a romantic relationship, how would that diminish the tremendous contribution she made toward the liberation struggle? You see?
Yeah, but that could possibly be our only motivation. For those, for our listeners who want to know more about the lady, also she plays a key role in that movie that was the movie titled "The Soundtrack to a Coup d'Etat." It's actually very, very good. I enjoy people to actually watch it. It's 2 hours 30 minutes, but it's 2 hours 30 minutes of at least, I counted, at least you would have to read 8 books to get that kind of content in one place.
Excellent. I myself look forward to watching it this afternoon.
Yeah, please do. It's titled "The Soundtrack to a Coup d'Etat." And so, speaking of soundtrack to a coup d'etat, we go to the Sahel region. Otherwise, in popular media, which I don't want to add voice to. And this story comes from the Financial Times. And there you see inserts, you see Ibrahima Traore. Once you see that in the background, you know what we're about to talk about. So the Financial Times writes, the terrifying crackdown on mining companies in Africa's coal belts. Military regimes in the Sahel have turned to tactics, including arrest, to assert control over critical mineral supplies. Underline that word, critical mineral supplies. And the story is filed in by Anu Adeoye in Lagos and Camilla Hodgson in London. International mining companies are at the mercy of terrifying tactics from military regimes in Africa's Sahel, whose leaders are using legal disputes, nationalizations, and arrest to assert greater control over crucial minerals like gold and uranium. Mali, in recent months, issued an arrest warrant for Barrick Gold Chief Executive Mark Bristow and detained Australia Gold Miners Chief Resolute, Chief Executive Terence Holloway. For nearly 2 weeks, authorities on Saturday even started seizing gold from Barrick, according to a company letter seen by the Financial Times. I'll just read one more piece before I get your thoughts. Niger has also stripped mining rights to one of the world's largest uranium reserves from French state-owned nuclear producer Orano, while Australia-backed gold miner Sarama Resources have launched arbitration proceedings against Burkina Faso after the junta withdrew its exploration license for a project. What do you...
Okay.
I don't even know.
All right, so...
I don't even know why I'm laughing.
So first of all, the language they're using, right?
Like if...
Arrest, terrifying tactics, mercy. But the most important thing, as you notice, that our audience should keep a focus on is crucial minerals, critical minerals, right? These are the most important things to keep an eye on. So first of all, the tone is as if there could be no legitimate issue of potential criminality involved, right?
Yes.
The way it's being presented. They're not bringing up what is being alleged that they did and what is the defense that is being offered by the people that have either been arrested or threatened with arrest or detained, right?
Correct.
So it boils down to, look, you have a bunch of Africans arresting European corporate executives. That's what the summary is.
Yeah.
Anybody listen carefully to what you just read so far, and they go back and read it, to themselves. That's what it boils down to. But then there are a few issues that we need to raise. Number one, these resources are in African countries, correct?
Correct.
So why should African countries not be in control, total control of these resources? The U.S. has many mines, plus, maybe the most in the world. This country's resources, not even all, are disclosed to the rest of the world. Who owns these resources? Is it a European company? Is it a Chinese company? In fact, if anybody does the research, you'll see there many times where there's been an executive order by the President of the United States barring foreign companies, particularly Chinese, from either investing or having a majority stake in some industries or acquiring them outright. You see? So now it's suddenly an international scandal when African countries are beginning to assert the same rights over their resources, which is what should have been happening from the 1960s, in fact. They would not be in the condition of impoverishment that they're enduring today had they started this strategy from the 1960s.
I mean, if you look at the last paragraph there, it says Niger has also stripped mining rights to one of the world's largest uranium reserves from French state-owned. So it's okay that European countries can have state-owned companies, but when African countries do the same, it is nationalization.
Yep. Absolutely. If African countries do the same, they will not have access to money from the World Bank and the IMF. So that's a very good point that you raised as well. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I continue. The more interventionist stance, according to people familiar with the regime's thinking, stems from a desire to assert national sovereignty after decades under the thumb of Western miners and subject to contracts.
Right, so time out. Why is that not the lead of this article? They know what they're trying to do, and they're now telling us exactly what they're trying to do. But in their minds, Africans don't deserve to do that. They're even bringing words such as under the thumb, right?
Yeah.
Meaning they know the current status quo is illegitimate and uncalled for. But where is this buried in the story? This should be the beginning. African countries are now increasingly asserting control over their critical minerals in an attempt to get a much more just and better deal. That's what the article is about. But instead, they distorted,
Opened
by
with their
keeping
headline.
scorn on the credibility of these African officials. And then finally, in their own words, they tell us what is really happening,
Okay.
But you might miss it if you get caught up in reading the red herrings, the distractions that they throw into the story, you see?
Yeah. So subject to contracts, the new rulers viewed as tilted in the favor of the companies. I wonder why that is. They have been rewriting mining laws. They're demanding higher tax payments.
Thank you.
And larger ownership stakes in the industry.
Thank you very much.
But have also resorted to restricting operations, issuing arrest warrants, and detaining employees.
Yep. You bring some company from Burkina Faso and start mining somewhere in the Midwest and see what will happen in the United States.
I'm sure there will be.
I mean, how dare these Africans to ask for more money?
Exactly. They are rewriting mining laws. Are the laws not for them to rewrite? Are they not national mining laws?
Laws
demanding higher tax payments.
Laws in the United States are rewritten or amended every day. Okay? They just want these African countries and the leadership to remain comatose, which has been the case in most cases since 1960s. And that's what they want.
Yep. I'll continue. It is terrifying dealing with the regime in Mali, said one person involved in the negotiation, who asked for anonymity. They are building arbitrary cases against companies to force them to negotiate and threatening arrest. The pressure tactics have turned into one of the biggest headaches facing the global mining industry at a time when companies around the world are trying to secure long-term uranium supplies and boost production of gold, whose price has risen to record high.
Okay. So It's amazing. The arrogance, right?
Yes.
In other words, the most important thing is the well-being of outside world, right?
In
Not the
particular, companies.
not the countries who own these resources. They're trying to secure long-term access, regardless of whether it does long-term damage to the economies of these countries. And that's why I keep saying, when we read these articles, we should always imagine the opposite of what is being said. And many times you understand what is missing from these stories.
Correct. I wrote down a question with regards to this particular story, and which is, how does you've largely answered it, but maybe you can underscore the point. How does historical patterns of exploitation by Western interests influence the current politics in the Sahel?
Well, it's what led to the formation of the alliance of the Sahel states. They're finally tired of this exploitation. And as I said many times, whether the leadership in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Niger, if they were initially inspired by their own selfish aggrandizement to seize state power, that is now in the past. That's now history. The momentum has changed the direction if that was not the intended direction. People are supporting them because they see them confronting neocolonialism. They see them asserting control over their resources with these practical measures that they're taking. They would pretty much, I'm sure, prefer the current leadership that they have to men dressed in nice suits, calling themselves civilians, but not doing anything for the welfare and development of their countries, you know? Yeah, so let the West keep referring to them as the Coup Belt. If the Africans are supporting the Coup Belt countries, that's the most important thing, to be supported by the people of this country. If the people of Burkina Faso and Mali and Niger say they no longer want these regimes, then of course we support them. We support the people. All the time we side with the people.
Okay. And speaking of a military arm, we go to our next story.
Oh no, there's another part in this article that I would like you to read. It refers to something about poverty. I forget what part about it. About these countries being poor. I don't know if you highlighted it.
1 second. I think I did. Let me second. Share. Where is it?
It was the most arrogant statement.
Okay, yeah. These countries are part of the semi-arid strip south of the Sahara, known as the Sahel, are amongst the world's poorest, but are rich in mineral resources.
So listeners, I want you to listen carefully and then laugh, because now you see how incompetent they are, even in their own journalism. They don't even see it. They're so contemptuous of Africans that they don't realize what they're saying. Read that one more time, please.
This country is part of the semi-arid strip south of the Sahara, known as the Sahel, are amongst the world's poorest, but are rich in mineral resources.
So if you are rich in mineral resources, and yet you're the most impoverished, what does that mean then? What does it mean is happening? They're confessing to their theft, right? They're confessing that they're stealing from us, they're exploiting us openly. Otherwise, how could you be rich and impoverished at the same time? You know, that is the lead of another article. The reason why these African countries are impoverished, even though they're rich in natural resources, is because they're being exploited and plundered by Western multinational corporations. So there are two stories that they were trying to hide in this article, even though they tell us. But if you just read it like that, probably 99% of people wouldn't even get it. And ask, wait, you're calling them, quote unquote, poor. At the same time, you're saying rich in mineral resources. Something missing. What is the missing element? Your exploitation of these countries. That's what you're not talking about. Yes, sir.
See? A placed phrase in the right sentence changes the entire framing of the story.
These
Amongst
folks are
the
amazing.
world's poorest, but are
Folks
rich
are
in
amazing.
mineral resources. Okay, interesting.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so speaking of imposition of impoverishment, we'll go for our next story, which is the eastern side of the continent. And it comes from Radio France International. And it is one that we've run before, but the conversation continues. Rebels tighten grip on Congo's mineral wealth as UN warns of long-term control. The M23 rebels are establishing...
Okay, so before we even read that, I would like to actually tackle the headline, because the headline would have different international impact and consequences if they had the correct headline. The correct headline should be Rwanda's military tighten grip on Congo mineral wealth as UN warns of long-term control. So if you have a headline like that, that obviously is going to be a matter that the Security Council has to deal with. You see?
Yes.
So they start the whitewashing and propaganda from the very beginning. There are no rebels in Rwanda. In Congo, I mean. This is Rwanda's national army posing as quote-unquote rebels. And the fact that major publications accepted, put it in the headline, that is part of the war of aggression against the people of Congo. The war that is conducted by the media, international media, is even much more damaging than the war by Rwanda's military, because that war by Rwanda's military could not survive if it's totally and properly exposed instead of being disguised with willing and aiding abettors in international media as a so-called rebellion, you see? So everything else is secondary once you've established the propaganda in the headline, you see?
Yes, and then you can then drive the point home,
Absolutely.
Okay. So it says M23 rebels are establishing control over key mineral-rich territories in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. United Nations experts have warned. So
Right.
why is it
So
that the United Nations...
Think about it. If you had Mexico, right? Canada, manufacturing so-called rebels, in vehicles that are brand new, totally fueled with all the electronic equipment on them, with satellite phones, clean uniforms, well-fed people, not any dirt on these so-called rebels, sponsored by Mexico, right? And occupying U.S. territory. What would happen?
Well, NATO will come to its rescue.
Boom. The U.S. alone would annihilate Mexico, right?
Yes.
So why is a war of aggression against the people of the Congo being tolerated? And of course, you and I know the answer. Because these Western corporations are stealing, plundering resources from the Congo. That's why they're not talking about Coup Belt, blah, 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 in that part of Africa. Because they're profiting. They're profiting. The Coup Belt and the negative projection are only in the Sahel, because the Sahel countries are saying, no, we want to control what belongs to us. You see?
Yeah. Continue?
Yes, sir.
They look well.
Look at that. No, tell me that is not a national army. Look at the stuff on his back, and then go back and Google research the images of Castro and his rebels. You could tell those were true insurgents, you see?
I mean, look at
military fatigue, hats like that. This is the equipment and uniform of a national army. And this stupid media, I think, they think we're so incompetent. They know this is a national army, and they pretend in their writing as if they don't know this is a national army invading Congo. We have to call them out in the most strongest language,
Okay.
Yes, sir.
We proceed. The Tutsi-led rebels active in North and South Kivu provinces have seized key towns since April 2024, allegedly with support from Rwanda forces. Though Kigali denies involvement and says it is committed to a ceasefire and peace talks.
So now, when he wrote that sentence right that you just read,
yes,
allegedly, Kigali denies. Are you saying this person is incapable of adding that? You have pictures, so presumably you were there, right?
Yes.
According to this correspondent, it's quite evident that these are actual, members of the Rwanda military. You could not add something like that. You allow that to carry this lie because Kigali denies it. So we have to really call them out, man. They're doing this because the people who are dying, Africans, Congolese, we won't let them get away with aiding and abetting Rwanda in the war of aggression.
And it continues, a report by the UN Security Council's group of experts accuses M23 of setting up shadow administrations to exploit strategic mines and trade routes. Yes, I would have to agree. For you to set up something like that, you have to have back support. There is no way you're setting up a shadow administration to exploit.
No, these media outlets, they really, they bring shame upon themselves. But you know what? They do it because there are not enough critical shows like the one that we have. Breaking it down line by line on a regular basis. And I encourage and urge our African sisters and brothers, please start your own media platforms where you have the kind of discussion that I'm having today with comrade brother Adesoji. The more of us that do it,
yes,
the more difficult it becomes for them to continue being the agents of propaganda and the handmaidens of aggression. It's not really so much Rwanda or Uganda. It is the multinational companies that support Rwanda and Uganda who are causing the bloodshed of our sisters and brothers in the Congo.
Yes.
Uganda and Rwanda, as we pointed out before, they don't have any factories. All these minerals that are stolen are exported overseas to the West. So it means they're really blood masters, right? With bloody hands are these corporations that are just using the leadership in Rwanda and Uganda, respectively Kagame and Museveni, to butcher fellow Africans while they steal our resources. And then they have these media outlets coming here to confuse you, a rebel, occupy, blah, 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 all nonsense. Let's call them out.
Yes. Okay, I continue. This constitutes the most important contamination of supply chains, with ineligible minerals recorded in the Great Lakes regions over the last decade. They said in their report. Over the last decade. So which means the case they have in France and Belgium has...
Absolutely. It has great potential. I love that. That is the most important part of the story, in fact. A better written article should have been, with the increasing legal challenges by the Congo to major Western companies such as Apple, it's going to be difficult for neighboring Rwanda and Uganda to continue their war of aggression against Congo. This is what the article, if I were to rewrite the article using the same information, that's how I would write this article,
Yep.
You see, they give us all the elements, but they piece it in their own way to confuse us. But you can use the same information in this entire article and write the correct story, which is this is a war of invasion, a war of aggression, and a war of aggression is always discussed in the Security Council, right? But if it's disguised as rebellion, then it's not going to be discussed in the Security Council. You see? It's being financed by the Western multinational corporations who benefit from these resources, which are not used in Rwanda and Uganda because neither country have factories.
Okay. The UN says M23 was financing its operation by exporting minerals from areas under its control, including coltan, a resource used in electronics like smartphones and computers. It added that M23 has created a mining ministry to oversee coltan exports from Rwanda, home to one of the largest deposits of the mineral. In this way, the militant collected at least $800,000 per month in
so
taxes.
pause there for a little bit.
Yes.
$800,000. We're talking about $1 million a month, right?
Yes.
Okay. So have they dug a huge pit in the sand and lined it with cement? And is that where the money is being stored? Where do you keep $1 million that you're generating per month? Think about that. If not in banks, in Rwanda, next door.
Yep.
Where would you put all that money?
Or Uganda.
You're talking, or Uganda, right? You're talking $8 million, right? In 8 months.
Yep.
That's being buried in some mattress somewhere. It's such a joke. You see?
And these are supposed to be journalists.
These are supposed to be journalists, and these are supposed to be credible, serious media company. And then, it's so ironic that you have the wrong person that should be complaining about fake news, right? And that is Donald Trump, right? Given his own conduct and his own serial lying, right? He's a habitual liar, right? Pathological liar. But nonetheless, he actually does have a point when he talks about fake news.
Fake news, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Because this is what this amounts to. It has all the information, but the way it's shaped and molded is to just, it's diversion and to confuse people. Meanwhile, the victims are the Congolese who are being displaced from their homes, right? So that the mining can occur, and who are being massacred and who are being raped.
Let's continue. So, the last part, a global issue. The UN reports highlights concern about how M23's actions could affect global electronic manufacturers, which face pressure to ensure their conflict-free supply chains. Congo has filed criminal complaints against Apple subsidiaries in France and Belgium, accusing the tech firm of using conflict minerals in its supply chain.
Right. Yeah, I think that's very correct. I think it would be very good if they go after every one of those companies that involved, and then nobody will be able to buy any of these minerals coming from Rwanda and Uganda. And that would be the end of it. Either that or a total embargo of any one of these types of products that are being shipped out of Rwanda and Uganda. You see? So that they have no choice.
Or even a pause.
Sorry? Even a pause while they evaluate this case. I agree.
Yeah.
Totally. That's a very good suggestion, actually. The Congolese should actually file an emergency injunction calling for that. Very correct. That's a brilliant suggestion. If they haven't thought of that, they need to do that. I agree.
And of course, go on.
Based on the evidence, the ruling will be in their favor. You see? So
very much so.
Starting from a pause, it would be effective order. You see?
Because if the story already alludes to the fact that they even have a ministry.
Think about that.
Within the territory of Congo, exploiting Congo's mineral resources. Talk about being comfortable.
And the victims, of course, as I said, are these poor, innocent Congolese civilians.
Yes. Still in Congo, we go for our final story, which resides with the origin of where we are today. And it's when one man says no, and the powers that be say, who are you to question our authority? And it's a story that was filed 2 years ago, but it resonates because on the 17th of January marks 64 years since the murder of Patrice Lumumba.
That's right.
And I picked this story specifically for certain elements of how the story was framed. And you could see the idea of trying to tell a story from a distant point of view, that almost as if you're reporting on something that you don't quite know the answer to. And so I begin. Belgium returns Patrice Lumumba's tooth to family 61 years, you could say 64 years, after his murder. Congolese independence heroes Gold-Cap Tooth, handed over as ex-colonial power, faces its bloody past. That's his son there, Roland. And he reads, Belgium authorities have returned a tooth of the modest Congolese independence hero, Patrice Lumumba, to his children in a new move towards recognition of atrocities that accompanied the country's brutal exploitation of the fellow colony. So Lumumba here, who was murdered by separatists and Belgian mercenaries in 1961, his killers dissolved his remains in acid, though some kept his tooth as a macabre memento. Could you just speak to the passive language here? Who was murdered by separatists and Belgian mercenaries? Before we continue.
Right. Well, I guess there's more elaboration that comes in the article, but
okay, let me continue.
Yeah, but you know,
his killers dissolved. So I've read that part. Lumumba's son Roland said last week that the return of the tooth meant his family would be able to finish their mourning. By returning the tooth, Belgium is hoping to draw a line under one of the most brutal and shameful episodes in the country's bloody exploitation of Central Africa. At that time, Alexander De Croo, the Belgian Prime Minister, recognized its moral responsibility for Lumumba's killing. This is a painful and disagreeable truth, but must be spoken, De Croo said. A man was murdered for his political convictions, his words, and his ideals. You want to say something before I continue?
Okay, in addition to his words and his ideals,
yes,
his attempt to gain economic control of the country's resources.
Those are ideas we can live with.
Precisely the reason why Belgium killed him, not so much because of his ideals.
Yes.
Because they asked for more control of the industry. That was the primary material at that time in Congo's history, in addition to uranium, of course. So now, I hope that our viewers, listeners are having the same reaction as they're listening to you read what you've read so far, right? We have a European nation, right? Europeans who supposedly came to civilize the African heathens, right? And they told you the kind, because obviously, forget about the separatists. These were all people being instructed by the neocolonial powers, which was Belgium, which was Britain primarily, and the United States, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And you learn that these civilizing Europeans took the teeth of the person whom they murdered and dissolved his body in acid as memento, took parts of his human remains. Just think about that.
And kept it.
And yet the Africans are the ones who have been referred to historically as the savages, you know. It's really, turning reality upside down. So that's what I wanted to say based on what you read so far.
Okay, I'll continue. A charismatic...
It is grotesque, to find a better word, actually. It's grotesque, okay?
Earlier this month...
Try to think about it. African killing a European and keeping his teeth for decades.
For more than half a century.
Think about that. And having it as an ornament on display in the home of this African, in some African country. What do people think about these Africans? I just want to pose that question. I want listeners to sometimes project and think about, what if I put myself in the shoes? I think it gives you a better understanding of the context of these articles that we critique on a regular basis, you know?
Yes. Yes. Because for long, the stories have been written without filter, and they will continue to be written without filter until someone pushes.
Absolutely.
So I'll continue. Earlier this month, the King of Belgium made his first visit to the DRC. Though he stopped short of offering a formal apology, King Philip expressed deepest regrets for the wounds of the past, describing a regime of unequal relations, unjustifiable in itself, marked by paternalism, discrimination, and racism that led to violent acts and humiliation.
Okay. So what's missing from the king's comments, of course, is the economic plunder, right?
Yes.
Economic plunder that started with Leopold II. And that needs to be included in these comments, because then we can now start talking about issues of reparations. Right?
Again, the article has not even brought up King Leopold anywhere. Yes. So I'll continue. A charismatic but volatile Pan-Africanist. Volatile, how?
Okay, I wanted you to bring that up, you know. Volatile, because you said the copper belongs to us. So why are we not getting the resources from the copper? So that is supposed to be volatile. Volatile with no elaboration or no evidence, but you let it just remain there without qualifying why you're demonizing him as having been a volatile. And this is that cut and paste approach. They cut and paste a sentence from a previous article, which cut and paste from a previous article. Probably began with a Belgian official in 1960 saying, "Oh, this guy is volatile." And since then, they go back and they read, because, you know, many reporters, they read things that have been published before. They just copy that and paste it in their articles. Why else would you do something like that and not provide any elaboration as to why you're referring to him as volatile? It means you just copy and paste. And the next person who writes about it will also copy and paste from this article that exact sentence. Boom. And I know this is what they do for a fact, because I don't remember when it was, a couple of years ago, the Ugandan correspondent for Reuters, you know, he writes a lot about Museveni. And then there was a reference, I forget the exact reference, but I think it has something to do with that he's sometimes criticized for strong arm tactics, whatever. But he reintroduced stability and is widely popular, which of course is a complete lie. But there was something else which had a factual error, which can be easily checked and shown to be a factually incorrect information in one of the sentences. And then I looked at about 5 or 6 different articles written by this same reporter, right? Going back to the past. And every one of those articles had that factual error, meaning it was being copied and pasted from one article to the next. You see?
He said it must be right.
I tweeted about it, and I made sure I tagged his editor, who's based in South Africa, the editor of Reuters. And then thereafter, his articles no longer
had that phrase,
that factual error with that phrase with the factual error. Yeah. So I know that they copy and paste many of these reporters, you know.
Okay. So continue. A charismatic and volatile Pan-Africanist who played a key part in the fight for independence, Lumumba became the first democratically elected leader of his country in 1960. Within a year, he had become a victim of Cold War politics, an internal power struggle, as order collapsed in the new state and rebel groups in the mineral-rich Katanga province, that's the area of Kivu again, sought to break away. Could you explain that part, please?
There's no need for a lot of explanation here, actually, because history has been consistent, right?
Yes, it has.
A few minutes ago, I was telling you there were no rebels in Congo.
Correct.
These are Rwanda's army. And what else is common at that time, which is common to what we are discussing today in Eastern Congo?
Mineral rich.
Resources.
Yes.
Well, you see? So in that case, the Belgians were the ones who are concocting these so-called rebels, who are actually under the instruction of Belgium and imperialism, causing havoc, bringing down Lumumba's government while they steal resources. Now you have two African countries, Rwanda and Uganda, using the same template that was used by the Belgians in the 1960s to continue stealing Congo's resources. So it's remarkable how 1960 equals 2025.
That is amazing. Now, there is this part. I started in green for a reason. Western officials worried that Lumumba will favor the Soviet Union as a protector and allow Moscow access to strategic critical resources such as uranium. I know that to be a fallacy. And the reason is, let's hear the man speak for himself. And I take from his speeches, interviews and speeches. This interview he did with Tom Brady of the New York Times. And he says, as a matter of fact, some centuries ago, America fought for its independence against foreigners. It will seem that the Americans should never forget it, but looks to me as if they're beginning to forget. Why do you think so? Brady asked. Look at what is happening in the United Nations. Lumumba replied, we gazed at the world, at the old world with trust. I am not a communist, although you maintain that I am. But America, no matter how things go, is on the side of the colonialists. Perhaps she's not on the side of Belgium, but it is obvious that in using the UN, she has an eye on our riches. It is like the business over the aircraft, for which I was attacked by newspapermen. I flew to America in a Russian plane. That is true. I asked the Americans for a plane, but they refused to let me have one after procrastinating with their reply for 2 whole days. What was I to do? I asked the Russians for a plane, and they put one at my disposal in 2 hours. Now, it is said I am a communist, but judge for yourself what is more important to be regarded as a communist or to turn down an opportunity to go to the UN to defend our interests there. Judge for yourselves.
Well, first of all, I'm saddened that he even had to talk like that to a Western European American reporter, right? Number one, so what if he was a communist? That's number one. Number two, why should an independent sovereign state not have the right to decide which country it wants to partner with? You see, it just tells you the nature of our weakness in the global system, that an African head of state should be speaking like that to a reporter, a journalist, literally begging not to be killed. Think about it. That's essentially what he was doing.
Yeah.
The U.S. is a member of NATO. It decides which country it wants to be its partners. Together with NATO, went and obliterated Libya in 2011. Think about that. So this guy is killed because he's given a plane to fly to the U.S.
To the UN.
It's just amazing. It's a very sad statement that you just read, that he had to be in that position. But that was the reality of the time. He was hoping they wouldn't kill him, and they still killed him anyway. Yes.
Let's continue. Following a military coup, Lumumba was jailed, tortured, and shot to death by a hastily assembled firing squad. After 40 years, Belgium acknowledged that it bore moral responsibility for his death. the CIA has also begun to draw plans to kill the 35-year-old politician. However, it took decades for the truth about the circumstances of Lumumba's murder to emerge. In the year 2000, the Belgian police, Gerard Sauté, confessed that he had dismembered Lumumba's body and dissolved the remains in acid. In a documentary screened on German TV, Sauté showed two teeth that he said belonged to Lumumba. In 2016, a Belgian academic, Ludo de Witt, filed a complaint against Sauté's daughter after she showed a gold tooth, which he said belonged to Lumumba's during an interview with a newspaper. The tooth was then seized by the Belgian authorities.
Macabre, just grotesque is all I can say.
Yes.
Very grotesque. That you have a father and the daughter continuing with the same bizarre pathology, this very sickness. It's very, very obviously very sick people. You see? Grotesque.
There's no other
and
words
yet the
for
Africans are the ones who are referred to as grotesque. But as a European, you just think you can keep getting away with it, you see?
Yeah. And it's important that we underscore this point by getting people to actually go and do some more reading, because it's important to have a broad view of what transpired then. They mentioned the CIA was party to the affairs in the Congo. So for that, there's no rest for the wicked. I give you this hefty book.
It's a beautiful book. If I ever visit the UK, hopefully maybe this year at some point, obviously I would like to break bread with you, but I would also like to meet the author of that book.
Susan Williams. Yes. So it's White Malice, the CIA and the neocolonization of Africa. And you can see where the crosshair is. That's where Congo is. And the gentleman who asked for the arrest of the daughter, Ludo de Witt, that's his book, The Assassination of Lumumba. So another brilliant book. I actually read this in 24 hours. It was painful to read, but it needs to be done. Yeah. Again, this is how we reframe the narrative about Africa, by breaking down the stories that they've put before us and also give it a historical context. Brother Milton is always here to, highlight the key parts that one might have overlooked in the course of reading. Because when you said, how can one be impoverished?
Yet
rich,
preposterous,
but yet rich in mineral resources, and no light bulb movement for the journalists writing that down. It's like,
no,
okay,
because Africans are always meant to be quote unquote poor, so it doesn't cross his mind what he's saying. It's so bizarre.
I mean, it's a remarkable world of narrative framing, but that's why we're here.
Yeah, but we'll change it. We keep changing it.
One story at a time. Yeah.
In the 60s, they would openly still refer to African savages, African tribesmen. So, we've come a long way, but we're not there yet. So we continue the challenge, and that is what we do.
So, in light of the incoming administration, and where do you think its focus might be on the international scene?
Well, obviously, it's, particularly my main interest, of course, is in Africa. It's going to be the resource areas. So whether the guy, still thinks there's a country called Nambia, at some point, the people that are close to him are going to convince him that we need to have a serious interest in the countries that have the resources, right? I want to watch carefully and see how they approach Rwanda. The person who's being mentioned as a possible undersecretary in charge of Africa
is?
I think his last name is Pham, Pham. I debated him many years ago on Straight Talk Africa with Shaka Sali. And, at that time, he was an endorser of Rwanda's neocolonial approach toward Congo. And when I came on the show, I think maybe I spoke first, and then he got a sense of my politics, and he adjusted his position a little. And I said, wow, that's very interesting. That if it's PHAM, then I said, Mr. Pham should say that. Because in an op-ed he wrote in the New York Times 2 days ago, he was saying the opposite. And I quoted from it. The guy turned red on the show, man. So, but I'm just saying, I hope he still does not have that notion, because that would just means that the problem in Eastern Congo might escalate. Obviously, Congo needs to find enough allies to help it drive these two countries out of Congo, which is Rwanda and Uganda.
Uganda.
Yeah.
Okay. And for the Sahel, you don't think it will be business as usual, or you think there might be some?
There is nothing that's going to reverse unless internal contradictions leads to internal power struggle. But there's nothing that's going to reverse Mali and Burkina Faso and Niger from the course that they're undertaking right now, you know?
So it's a safe bet that France is going for.
The U.S. is not in a position to do that, you know? And ironically, this guy, he seems to be much more averse into wars of imperialism overseas when compared to the Democratic administration, ironically, you know? So let's wait and see what unfolds.
Okay. Well, I must say thank you again. We've come to the end of another very powerful episode. Thank you. Thank you very much. And to our listeners, yes, you can do like, share, and subscribe. You can download the audio version of our discussion Monday morning, wherever you download your podcast from. And Brother Milton, thank you very much for coming through. And last words?
Luta continua.
Victoria Seta. And for me, Odigba Kono. And thank you all for watching. And till next week, see you. And God bless. That's a wrap for this week on the African News Review podcast. We hope you are leaving with a clearer, more truthful picture of Africa. Remember, every story has another side, and we're here to uncover it. Don't forget to join us next Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we continue to challenge the narratives and reclaim Africa's voice. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeing Africa for what it truly is.